Joel, thanks for blessing us by sharing your gift, man. That was beautiful. We wrapped up the book of Daniel last week, and today being Palm Sunday, I wanted to talk to you about something from Holy Week. So we are in John chapter 2. If you're using the blue Bibles that are around the space, it's on page 1648. We're in John chapter 2. If you're somebody who likes to follow along, there are outlines at the end of every row. You can snag one of them, jot down your own thoughts, or just see where we are in the progression there. John chapter 2, starting in verse 12. After this, he, being Jesus, went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed for a few days. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. You always go up to Jerusalem, by the way. It's not a north-south thing. It's just Jerusalem is an elevated concept, so you go up to Jerusalem. 14. In the temple courts, he found a man selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all of them out of the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get out of here! How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Then the Jews demanded of him, "What miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all of this?" And Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." The Jews replied, "It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days." But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said, and they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many people saw the miraculous signs that he was doing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. He did not need man's testimony about man, for he knew what was in a man. This turning over of the tables in the temple is one of the more famous stories in the Bible. Even people who aren't familiar with much of the rest of the text know that this event happened. We'll come back to it in a second, but I want to talk to you about perspective and rationale. One of the things that I always laugh about is that when I was a youth pastor up until 2016, I watched this generation of teens as their relationship to technology changed. I watched some funny things happen. And around 2012 to 2014, somewhere in there, I realized that this generation of teenagers were what they called digital natives, that they had never not had these technologies that they now had. And it was actually a marked difference in our high school group between the freshmen and sophomore and the juniors and seniors, because the juniors and seniors sort of remembered a time before, but the freshmen and sophomore, this was the water that they swam in. It came second nature to them. And once in a while, they would ask me some funny, what seemed to me to be funny questions, and they would just say things like if you told a story about getting lost, they'd be like, "You didn't have GPS?" No, we had paper maps. You're like, "What?" Yeah. Or you would tell a story about my freshman year of college, staying up late in the dorms with my buddies, arguing about trivia. And somebody would say, "Why didn't you just Google it?" Well, you couldn't. There was no end to the argument because no one had the final authority, of the answer You just had, and so what we would do is, like, for instance, if we're arguing about a movie and somebody was talking, let's say, about Kevin Spacey being in a movie, you go, Kevin Spacey wasn't in that movie. You're like, sure it was. You're like, no, you're thinking of a different actor. Who are you thinking of? And you would talk and have more coffee and more refreshments and blah, 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 and you talk. And finally you'd go, hold on. Isn't the guy down in room 116, isn't he's like really into movies, right? So you'd all walk down and you'd knock on his door and you'd be like, was Kevin Spacey in this movie? He'd be like, no, right? Unless somebody had authority, there was no like final thing. Well, I realized a couple weeks ago that this has actually become, I probably use Google, let's say 6 or 7 times a day, which seems like a lot to me. Since I didn't grow up with it, it really is quite a luxury to just be able to Google anything that you're curious about. But I had a conversation with my sister, who's closest to me in age. She called me on my birthday, and it was so nice to hear her voice. And she said, you seem surprised. And I said, you know, you're the first person to call me today, but it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Everyone else had just texted. And I hadn't heard anyone's voice say happy birthday. And it was so nice that my sister, who's closest to age with me, called, and to hear her voice. And she said, happy birthday, and it sounded amazing. And I said, you're the first person to wish me a happy birthday today. She said, that is so sad. She's sort of anti-technology, or like suspicious of technology anyway. And she said, why have we stopped calling each other? And I said, well, we just text all the time. But ever since she planted that seed in my head, I've noticed something. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a morning person. I am up way before the sun comes up, which is great because I'm really productive with no interruptions and I get a lot done. But I'm alone with my thoughts a lot. And if it wasn't for Google, I could be in real trouble because songs get stuck in my head, but I'm not great with lyrics. So I will get like the first couple lines to a song, and then I don't know the rest of the words. But my hyperactive mind starts putting in fun new words. So I just come up with songs. So I don't actually know the words to songs. And if it wasn't for Google, for me to stop and to like find out what the real words are, I could get myself in a world of trouble. Well, this past week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I'm walking around here, I'm cleaning up, doing whatever. And do you remember the song, I'm John Jingleheimer Schmidt? Have you thought of that song in years? Me neither. And yet I'm walking around and I'm going, I'm John Jingleheimer Schmidt. His name is my name too. And then I go, wait, what is that song about? I don't even know what that song's about. So then I started thinking, is that about solidarity? Is it saying like, I'm with that guy? Well, I have no idea, but Google did. So I Googled it, and it turns out, no. But it was nice to know, be relieved of that. But in the past, I would have called my little sister because she knows all the same songs I know, only her memories from childhood are much better than mine. And so I used to call her and say, hey, do you remember this song? The other one that got stuck in my head a couple weeks ago was, I sing because I'm happy, I sing because I'm free, but then I don't know the rest of the words. So I just started making stuff up. But normally I would have called her and said, what are the rest of the words to that? But instead I just Googled it. I bring this up because when it comes to the text that we read today of Jesus turning over the tables in the temple, I don't know if you're aware, I don't know if you watch the news, not everyone's happy about what's going on in our country right now. I don't know if you're aware of this, yeah. If you watch the news, you can tell. And so on my social media feeds, there's been a lot of references in the past 6 months to turning over tables and using Jesus to justify it. I've noticed the table flipping is getting a lot of attention because people are upset and they want to let the powers that be know that they're not too happy. And so there has been what I'm going to I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to call a disproportionate amount of attention going to this one-time event of Jesus flipping tables in the temple. I've been thinking a lot about this, not only because it's in my social media feed, but because we, as a Bible study on Wednesday nights, are reading through the Gospel of John. And I know that John, which was written much later than the other Gospels, puts the clearing of the temple, this table flipping event, John puts it right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry to set the tone. Whereas the other three canonical Gospels that we have, they get called the Synoptic Gospels because they're in sync with each other. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they have this event, the clearing of the temple, at the end of Jesus' ministry, like the exclamation point. John has it right up at the beginning to set the tone. The other Gospels have it at the end because it builds to a crescendo. And so I know that when we get to this passage, actually, this is the passage we're going to read in 2 Wednesday nights this is where we left off, that we're going to have to talk about how John is different than the other three synoptic Gospels. And so I've been thinking a lot about why John puts it right at the beginning here to set the tone for Jesus' ministry of conflict with the authorities and the institutional religion of his day. So I did a little experiment, and I Googled something that I was curious about. So Jesus flipped over tables one time, but it gets a lot of attention. And it probably should, because acts of protest, right, transgressive, theatrical demonstrations, they draw a lot of attention. Often they come with a threat of violence or civil disobedience. The volume can be quite elevated, and they should get a lot of attention. It's why protest draws so much attention. It can be a useful tool to those who don't feel heard. But I Googled, how many times did Jesus sit at a table with somebody and eat? Anybody want to take a guess? So just in the Gospel of Luke, we have 10. And if you look at all of the Gospels together, there are 19 occasions on which Jesus sits at table, has a meal with somebody. And I got thinking that in our times, that number forms an interesting proportion. So I want to present a possible application to you today for your consideration, okay? On one hand, if you find yourself in 2025 with a desire to protest or civil disobedience or to smash things like the patriarchy or throw things like turning over tables. If you find yourself wanting to do that, I get it. Let me just put some math in for your consideration. For every exclamation point of protest, what if you committed to being at table with people who are like you and not like you 19 times? Right? I'm just saying, if that's the proportion that we see in Jesus, what if we adopted that to say, for every time I protest or throw things, 19 other times I am committing to being across the table from somebody who bears the image of God, the Imago Dei, right? To be in communion, to commune. Second thing, for those of you who find yourself at the kitchen table a lot, what if, let me just throw this out for your consideration, what if for every 19 meals you eat, you do one act of protest? I'm just throwing out some math here. For every 19 meals you eat, and let's say Jesus ate 2 a day, probably in that first century culture, that's probably what happened. Not 3 square like we get, 2 a day. So for every 19 times you were at the kitchen table, if you threw in every once in a while something that benefited maybe somebody who can't stand up for themselves, or you spoke up for somebody who isn't being heard, or you reached out to somebody who sees the world very differently than you. If you, in big and small ways, said, for every 19 times I take something in, I'm committed that one time I'm going to do something outside my comfort zone. I'll write a letter. I'll make a phone call. I'll stand on the street corner. I'll go ring my neighbor's doorbell and introduce myself. We've lived next to each other for years and I have no idea who they are, right? Just anything. Transgressive, anything outside your comfort zone. In this text, we have to ask the question, why did he do this? It was such a dramatic, threatening, it's menacing, you might even say, demonstration. You have to understand that what was happening in this story, it's not just the things that are said, sometimes it's the things that aren't said that really help us understand the context for a story like this. When people came to Jerusalem, pre-cars and pre-gas stations, travel was a huge undertaking. And if they had to bring the animals from their own home, that's quite a lot of work to get the animals to the temple. So a little side business started up that you didn't have to bring your own dove or your own goat or your own, right, whatever, but that they would be available for purchase at the temple. And so there's a part of that seems a little shady, but, for utility, for convenience, you can sort of understand that. The problem is that this had become big business. And there were some underhanded things, right? There's some shadiness going on. But the bigger issue is that this side hustle had actually taken over an area of the temple footprint, which was the court of the Gentiles. Folks who weren't Jewish, like me and many of you, wouldn't have access to the entire temple complex. But we had a court, right, that the Gentiles could go in. And this big business, this side hustle, had taken over that entire space and had pushed out people that Jesus was pretty convinced God cared about and wanted in the business, in the process, And so there's a lot of different layers of Jesus's outrage here. Not only was it the shadiness of the business, the placement of it, but it was also the people who were being marginalized and pushed out that Jesus was standing up for. And so this zeal consumed him. And I always like to think, if we were filming this scene, after we read a section of the Bible, I always think, what would it look like to film this scene? What would the cinematography look like? And this really captures my attention because there's an interesting detail in here. Jesus he braided a whip, right? This isn't Indiana Jones. He didn't have it on his hip. He didn't find it at one of the booths and vendors. He made it. How long do you think that took? Yeah, let's say 10 minutes. Have you ever stewed on something for 10 minutes? You can get pretty worked up in 10 minutes. So he's standing there, or sitting there, and he's braiding this thing. I picture him glaring at the vendors. Right? By the time he makes this thing, he's pretty mad. So he cracks it, probably startles all the animals. The people start making their way to the exit. He takes their money, right? Because they're exchanging money that's for this. You have to keep in mind that the Jewish people had their own money before the occupation that we talked about in Daniel. And so now they're using Greek money. And so there's an exchange that happens at the temple. He takes the money and throws it. That'll get your attention. And then he grabs the table, turns it over. It's pretty menacing, actually. It's quite a demonstration. You'd have to be pretty outraged at the condition of things to pull a stunt like that. And I get it, because there are things worth being that upset about. And I get why people on my social media feed are referencing this outburst, this transgressive act, this political demonstration. I get why it's being referenced so much in the last 6 months. But I just want to throw out a little math and say, okay. But proportionally, let's also commit to being at table, not just flipping tables, but to being at the table with each other. For your consideration.